Yeah, hi guys, in this video we're going to talk about assertiveness, and we're going to talk about what is assertiveness, what is the difference between assertiveness and confidence, what are the 4 types of assertiveness, how to become more assertive, and what is the power of being an assertive person. And today I have my lovely best friend, Professor Dr. Bianca Serwinski with me. She is going to tell us all about that.
Hi, welcome to the channel. I'm Tanya, a consultant turned entrepreneur, and I spent 13 years in business. And on this channel, we're going to talk about all the things that I wish I knew. Please use the comment section to interact with me and follow and like for more.
Thank you for having me, Tanya. I'm excited for chat today. My name is Dr. Bianca Serwinski, and I'm an assistant professor in psychology at Northeastern University, London. Well, so Tanya, so everything that I taught you, what do you think is assertiveness?
Well, I took some notes because, it's really hard to remember students. That's not being a psychologist myself. So assertiveness is a social skill for effective and respectful communication, right? Second, people who have this skill communicate their needs, their wants, and their opinions, and their boundaries, and the boundaries for the people in the back. Boundaries, yes, everyone, clearly. Number 3, assertive people can respond to stressful situations in a very calm way, and they are generally less worried. Well studied. Do you have anything to add?
Great summary.
Yeah. Thank you. Well, it does sound like confidence, right?
Well, the difference between confidence and assertiveness really is that confidence is more an internal thought process. So typically it's more an intrapersonal skill. So we're thinking in a positive way about ourselves. We have a baseline self-esteem pattern that is much more positive about ourselves, and something that we call self-efficacy. So self-visibility, that you can actually achieve what you set your mind to. Whilst assertiveness is not necessarily a thought process. It's kind of like a consequence of self-confidence. Why? Because it turns out in behaviors to be a self-confident behavior. So just to make it more clear is that self-confidence is what is going on in your head, whilst assertiveness is what's going on with other people.
But can you be confident without being assertive, and vice versa?
Yes. So there could be people that don't really think very positively about themselves, and in situations they respond fairly positive and they don't engage in any type of conflict. Fair enough, fair play. But often this can also turn into situations in which this might be toxic or anxiety provoking for them.
Thank you so much for that explanation. There are 4 different types of assertiveness. The first one would be passive, passive-aggressive, aggressive, and assertive. And why don't we go into each one of them a bit more in detail, and you'll explain what everything is.
Sure. So assertiveness is a spectrum. And we would start by individuals that are on the passive spectrum, which means they could be seen as a deer. Deer in the animal kingdom would be shying away from all kind of conflict. It hears something, it notices something, and it was just to stay, right? So if we think about what this type of character thinks, it is, I'm not able to deal with that situation. Or, hey, you are much better than me, so you're above me, so I need to behave in that way. So what do? They are quite submissive. They're shying away from all kinds of different situations where they feel they're not equipped to respond in an adequate way. They would be having a body posture that depicts timid kind of reaction, which is kind of thinking, I'm not good enough. So they don't really respond to an individual. They wouldn't really hold eye contact. They would kind of like separate with their fingers, and they would kind of talk more towards the floor rather than really respond to the person or look into the camera. So a passive person typically thinks you're better than me, right? So it kind of puts you on a pedestal. And that is depicted in all their behaviors and their thought patterns. And the way how they would respond to criticism would be that they would be quite apologetic. They would believe they are a loser, and that gets depicted in their response.
Okay. Wow. And how do you work with somebody like that?
So given that they have a timid nature or kind of retract themselves from those situations, you would prefer a response in which you would not really comment on any of their shyness. So you would try to self-assure the person a bit more. Tell them what they have done well, set little milestone achievements, and actually celebrate with them, for them, praise them in their achievement of these goals. And you would also try to self-disclose. So imagine you have a person that doesn't like to talk about themselves. The more you ask them questions and they are more personal, the more you would get actually something out of them. And that is, everyone likes to talk about themselves. A shy person might shy away from that. So the more you bring that out in them, the more you will create a trust and a bond in that.
Cool. Thank you so much for that explanation. I think a lot of people can resonate with that. Let's move on to the passive aggressive type. What about that?
The passive aggressive person is an individual that he is often quite cooperative, but then you end up having difficulties with that person of some sort. And hence the cat really depicts this character quite nicely, because it might come and try and be quite nicely and cuddly, but then suddenly it turns up at you or she scratches you. And you end up thinking, why did that happen? What did I do? But it's on the terms of the cat. So a passive aggressive person is really dictating kind of where situations sometimes go towards. You don't expect things to happen sometimes. And that can play out in different scenarios. It could be that you find the person sabotaging your relationship or your progress. It might be that they might be gossiping behind your back. Bad information. Your rowdy behavior at the last Christmas staff party. Or it could be also that the person just doesn't respond appropriately, delays progress on a particular project. You're meeting deadlines or you're setting deadlines, but the person deliberately or potentially because of internal conflicts just does not continue the work. So what do they typically think? They're again on a spectrum. So we have the passive and the aggressive element. We've talked about the passiveness. So they might have an internal thought process, self-confidence, which is quite low. So they don't really hold any positive views about themselves, but they try to become more assertive and aggressive to kind of counterbalance this. And that's a two-faced person typically. However, you can also have the more aggressive element, which sometimes becomes more aggressive than passive. So to speak, you might have passive aggressive or the passive aggressive. And that is where do you have a little bit of this stronger balance towards each of those. And the aggressiveness is the one where a lot of individuals, the stronger they are passive aggressive, the more you will feel it. It's being hurt. So it's really proper backstepping. It's not that common to see in a very extreme form though.
Okay. If I have the feeling that I'm working with somebody who's passive aggressive on one way of the spectrum, what would be the best way to work with them?
So it depends on the situation, depends on the scenario and the individual. But if you notice that there's actions that prevent you from progress in some sort, whether on a project or moving up the hierarchy, you would want to create clear expectations and clear communication. So you would actually speak out the problem and the conflict to the person in a very assertive manner. And we will get into what assertive manner actually really is. What is really difficult with the passive aggressive, but also with the aggressive type, is that you will notice you're not really here to change them. They will not change that easily. So whatever you do is not really turning into a proper behavior change. It's just at the surface. It might not seem that way.
Okay. Interesting. That's very interesting. Because I think, again, I mean, if we think we're in business or we will have met people or we will meet people who are passive aggressive, who are backstabbing. I mean, it's just the way it is, you know, you can never get around and not have people like that. So I think it's really important to know how to talk to them. And the best way really is to be assertive when you speak to people like that. Yeah.
Aggressive individuals or passive individuals will create a particular atmosphere, but passive aggressive, they are creating confusion, mistrust, and toxicity, basically. And you will notice that fairly quickly because you can't understand them, because there's often a mismatch between what do they really think and how do they behave, because they're not really in tune with their emotions.
So interesting. Okay, I can name a million already. Okay, so that's really interesting. And what about the aggressive type then?
So the aggressive, they are much more easier to detect because they're loud, they're dominant. They just want to get their way across. So the lion in the animal kingdom is literally the boss of the jungle. They will do anything to get their way and everyone knows it. So the behaviors are clearly distinctive in terms of I will achieve and get whatever I need to do to get what I want. And that is what is their thinking. So their thinking is good, but you are not. So if I'm good, I care what I do to you as long as I want. And you feel it very easily because you notice there's dominance. Their strengths, people are intimidated by that. They show that in their posture. So they're direct. They're much more focused on individuals. Their expressions are much more stronger. People see them as confident characters. And that is a very strong attribute about them, right? So they all want to be perceived as strong. The only problem is they do walk on their bodies. So passive individuals particularly would be really, really, really going down with those type of individuals.
So do these people, they keep eye contact and they have very big emotion, big gestures as well? That's what you're trying to say.
Yes. Often they would use their bodies to inflate themselves a little bit, whether that's wanted or unwanted. I mean, the good thing about them is that they have a very strong belief about themselves. So coming back to confidence, it is where they have high confidence about themselves, but an aggressive way of dealing with.
Okay.
They would have a more fiercer look and stare towards you, and they would more likely provoke with that.
I think that's really hard to detect though, except for if, obviously you have an aggressive person and they start shouting. Because that for me would be a direct distinction of, okay, that's really an aggressive person. If they start shouting, being really loud and getting really angry, that's how I would label them. But maybe it's not the only expression, right?
I mean, shouting behaviors would only occur in certain situations in which aggressiveness would need to be used, right?
Yeah.
So you're right. It's difficult to detect them, but research studies, they show that actually at every top branch of hierarchies of businesses, that's why we have lions. That's why we have the aggressive people. Why? Because they managed to get their way across. And
how would you work with somebody like that then?
Very similarly to the passive aggressive style. So often these are being put in one pot because assertive reactions there is particularly important. Why? Because you need to set your boundaries. You need to tell them what of the behaviors specifically that they enacted are not acceptable for you. You would not use you statements because they get very easily offended and blamed, and that only create more conflict. So you reverse it, and we would name it as I statements. My statements are not you did this and you made that and you said that, but it's about, what you said made me feel that and that and that. And I perceive this as a quite threatening message. It's not about you gave me a threatening message or why are you threatening me, but I feel threatened by you. Or I feel threatened by what you just said or how you said it.
That is so difficult to do in business.
Absolutely.
Imagine having the boss, and you're delivering a project or something and something needs to be escalated and then they shout at you. How are you going to stand up to somebody like that?
So then we come to the assertive reaction. So the assertive reaction would be in which you say, okay, I understand that that is a difficult situation, a difficult scenario, and because of X, Y, Z, and you point out what were those examples that were the conflicts, often a replacement of the but with an N. So instead of saying but, we say, oh yes, I agree, and, which gives much more a solution-focused approach, but praising the aggressive style, which is what they want to hear. Further, what is a very difficult scenario is you actually don't like them because you also feel intimidated by that. Right? But ultimately, what you want to achieve is find similarities. So rather than pointing out and thinking, what are those differences, is that you try and find what are the similarities? Where can we talk at the same level? And again, this is not an easy task, but you do this by pointing out regularly, constantly, what are those reactions that you're not comfortable with.
Okay, but then how would we have something in common if I'm setting my boundaries?
So the aggressive type will try to convince you. There will be elements where you feel maybe that is a fair point. Maybe not in every sentence, but there will be communication elements within a project or within the task or within someone else that was involved. So focus on the things where you can body up with the person because that person will be less intimidated and threatened by you and will be more open towards communication with you.
That is an excellent point. Thank you so much for explaining that. I feel like I should have known this 10 years ago. Maybe my career would have been so much better.
Would have in a very different direction.
Those are some really interesting points. I think it's just really hard to be assertive in that specific situation, even though you want to and you try, but you also have to be kind to yourself that you cannot handle every single situation perfectly. You need a lot of experience to just be able to, first of all, detect people like that, and then also learn how to calm yourself and really think clearly and specifically then use the tools that you have just given us and use those to work towards an assertive style of communication. So let's get into assertiveness.
Yeah, so the ideal gold standard is assertiveness. And that is towards the end of the spectrum. Everyone really would like to be self-assertive. The only thing is, how do we get there? So a self-assertive individual in the animal kingdom, perfect in balance, very emotional, intelligent animal is a dolphin. So we would see, the dolphin is very beautifully communicating with all of its species, but then also is very friendly to other species, such as humans. What an assertive person thinks is that you're the same as me. You're not really above me, you're not really below me, and I treat you as such. Really about what I say, it's about how I say that. And I want to get my message across, but I do it in a very polite and a very non-violent way, which creates just understanding, harmony, empathy in an ideal situation.
You can also say no, but you can say it nicely.
Exactly.
It's not, you don't have to say no and always be aggressive with it. You can say no and put your boundaries, and you can put them in a very assertive way. But that's also okay.
How would you say no if I asked you?
So if you would give me a task, which I know I cannot finish, then my response would be, I'd say, thank you for thinking of me to support you with this task. However, I currently still working on another assignment and I really cannot squeeze this in. So I can suggest person XYZ to support you with that task because we have the same skill set, or, she also knows about this issue, etc. Or I could say, look, I can give you my time next week. I have space on Tuesday where I can work on this for a couple of hours.
Yeah, and what you also need to do with it is finding a solution for that person. Yeah. So you apologize for the fact that, oh, sorry, I can't really, but you're finding a solution for that person.
Yeah.
And the person will feel understood in that way and also will perceive it as you are taking that person seriously. Yeah. So you're finding a situation, another person, or postpone your time.
Yeah.
That's a right strategy. Yeah. And this example for saying no is ultimately the same as setting boundaries. You're just setting, this is where I'm behaving in your particular area and our comfort zone, but this is where the boundary is. And I do not like to go above this point.
So how do you work in general with an assertive person?
I mean, it's an ideal, really, to be honest, or an ideal boss. It is someone in which you're in tune with a person, you like to spend time with. You will not really create any conflict unless you're the person that has the problem.
Yeah.
But if you come across an assertive person, actually you deal with all kind of situations that are awkward, stressful, dangerous potentially, but in a very easy, conflicting manner. So there's no problem, actually.
That's the dream. I had one single boss who was like this. I'm still reminiscing, yes.
Yes. I want to learn from those types of people more.
And that is why it is so important to be assertive in business, because I think it is the only way that you can manage yourself and your team around you and your bosses without getting extremely frustrated. We talk a lot about professionalism, but what is that really? And in my book, it is really to be assertive, because that is the easiest way to work with somebody. It is the most clear way. It is the most, you have little friction, and it is good for the person you're working with. You're creating a really nice environment. And it's not just that person, but it's their family, their partner, their friends, all of them. You are creating such a nice environment for them, because if you are a shitty boss or if you're a shitty person at work, right? And then you're passive aggressive and you're gossiping, you're creating a toxic environment. Like the people who are trying their hardest to be assertive, or they're trying their hardest to be nice and kind and, and set their boundaries in a very respectful manner, then these people will go home and complain about you. Tell us, how can we become more assertive?
I would say it's following the points of emotional intelligence, which are self-awareness, really trying to understand, why did I react that way? You need to reflect. You need to become introspective for that. And you need to understand yourself first. And I feel this is really difficult. People are not taught how to do this. And I feel people do not know where to start with this, because they just don't know how to behave in situations, and they don't understand that their response also comes from somewhere. Yeah. So I have thought something, and because of this thought, I've reacted in that way. So we use this ABC model in psychology, which states A is an activating event. It starts with triggering something in you, and C is a consequence. And we emotionally react towards something, or we behaviorally react to something. It could be crying, which would be slamming the door, which could be aggressively shouting back. But that all comes because of the B in between. We, however, think it leads to C. It's actually A leads to B, which is a belief about A, of what you said to me just right now, of how you looked at me, or that you're giving me an extra work, or that you're giving me a hand on a project which I don't like, or working with someone that I dislike. And I end up having a consequence from A. I perceive it comes from A that is maladaptive. It's not useful for you. If you do not know, it's not A triggered all of this. It is B, because you believed in something in that way. You thought it's unfair. You thought, hey, why are you talking to me like that? You thought, I don't want to take on that project. Like, I have more things. I don't want to work with that person. That is your thought. Does the person know these thoughts? Potentially, yes. If it's a passive aggressive or aggressive person you need to work with, but potentially also not. But you do not take that on board that someone else doesn't have bad intentions. You just perceive it as a threat. We have our internal thought process of the bee that then triggers a consequence. And that is very difficult to understand. So once we identify the bee that can be unhelpful, then things start to roll in a more positive way. Because we identify, wow, it's actually my thought that changed everything. Then that is emotional awareness. You figure out if it was me. Self-motivation is another point. You start to work on yourself, being self-disciplined. You don't need other people. You don't need extrinsic motivators to be able to move up the hierarchy or money, to be able to just work for money or for repetition. But actually you have your own abilities and your own desire to reach something. And then once you have these, you move on to others. And that is where you set boundaries. So how can you state what you want and what you don't want? But also how can you practice to say no? Well, just practice it in the supermarket, return something, or in a clothes store, return something, and just really get into this awkwardness in which you need to have a debate. Get into no, I want to really return this in your mind. How do you need to respond to this? You create the response because we're faking it fast and then we are kind of internalizing it. And then another strategy would be active listening, which is such a simple concept, but we all don't really know how to really do it. And the point is, how do you really take someone's conversation further for that person and for you not to constantly think, what is the next thing that I can add to this? Or how can I add my story, my thought processes? And this is what happened to me. But it's really asking questions and figuring out what the other person thinks to understand the person and the situation more. And we tend to not do that really because we live in a selfish world. So we all think about how can I think more? How can I talk more? How can I be perceived as funny? How can I be perceived as nice and confident? And it's not all about that, but that's what we kind of are being told and shown. And active listening is so much more needed. I feel it's so underrated in social communication in the workplace.
Okay, yeah, cool. That is so hard to do. Thank you so much for elaborating on all this. And I hope this wasn't too much for everyone, but it is very important and it is so useful to really understand this concept and to internalize it, I think.
And put it into practice.
And put it into practice and practice and practice and practice. And the more you practice, the more experience you gain and the better you will become at it. And the more you will see that you will just be all in all a happier person because you know you did whatever you could. You know,
you wanted,
and you have whatever you wanted, and you were like in every situation that might have gone south, you would be the person who would say, look, I really tried hard to keep it together and to stay calm and to manage the situation. It didn't work, but at least you tried, you know?
And that should make you,
that should make you so proud. Exactly. Yeah. And then coming to the last part, which is what is the power of being an assertive person?
Yeah. I mean, it will avoid any type of conflict. Whether that's in a relationship, whether that's in your family environment, friends, and ultimately work. I mean, you will end up having much better communications with people. You will feel better about yourself. You will feel better about the way you interact with others. Others will see you as a much better team player.
Yeah.
Your mental health is transforming because you will end up just feeling good about yourself and proud and confident because assertiveness feeds back. So the behaviors feeds back into the way of how you think about yourself. So you will observe, hey, I actually managed to do that. So you end up thinking you are better than you are. And that is a powerful strength.
So cool.
It was lovely to have a chat with you on the sofa.
Yeah, what a cool conversation. Thank you so much. I've known you for so long and we've spoken about assertiveness for so many times.
But not in such a way.
But every time I speak to you, I learn something new. And it's so cool because it is just so fascinating. And we deal with this on a daily basis. So, Bianca, where can people find you on the internet?
I have an Instagram account and that is prof.bianca.
Find it in the description of this video. And follow because there's going to be new things coming.
But I also find it very exciting that you actually explore this and that you set these questions for yourself and want to really give something out and explain what assertiveness really is and help people with that. So it's a great initiative.
Thank you. So people, if you like this video, please don't forget to subscribe and like and also comment if you have more questions for Bianca. And I'll see you next time. Bye. Bye. This special guest today, Cam.